All right, we're at time, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for having your name tags out. Super helpful. You'll see me a lot during class, like reading your name tags and looking at your face and going up and down, and it's just kind of helping me. I want to get names down quick, and that's a super big help. Hope everyone's doing all right today. Let's get this going. We're going to continue histology today, picking up where we left off from lecture on Monday. So in advance of class today, you had a program. You had a whole bunch of reading and a couple of short video, or just one short video, I think I assigned for today. I want to remind you that reading, it's going to be kind of, I put it all in one program, but it kind of continues through next week, and in fact, through next week's lab. So that will be a really handy reference for you as we move into our lab next week. It has a lot of detail on histology. I'm going to cover some of it in class. I covered some on Monday. We'll cover more today. Kind of an overview, and then lab next week will be on histology as well. So we're really going to spend the next week or so getting this down. We'll cover a little bit of integument as well later in the week, and that relates to what we covered in lab yesterday, skinning your cat. So before we dive into what we're doing today, what questions do you have about what's going on with class or histology, epithelial cells, life? Any questions? Yep, please.
Clarification.
Yep.
For the exam that's due Monday or whatever, is it on this lecture?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. So you have your first quiz coming up later this week. It's been announced on the programs. I actually have a slide with some details on that later on today for you. But it covers everything up through what we cover today in class. It will not include what we cover on Friday. And the reason for that, I'm very intentional, is I want to make sure that if you have any questions about any material, you have like a couple of days to get those questions together and ask me before the quiz. I don't want to cover something on Friday and then say, okay, now you got a quiz on it. Doesn't give you any chance to study. Yes, please. Oh, wait, I'm looking for your name tag. Sorry. Okay, help me out. Just remind me, please. Sarah. Okay, I apologize if I do ask your names the first couple weeks. I'm just getting them down, so don't take it personally. Sarah, question. Sorry, go ahead.
Does it come with lab material?
No stuff in lab, just lecture. Yeah, thanks for asking that too. Sarah, okay, cool. Any other questions? All right, well, let's dive in then. Today, we are going to start off with a review question on embryology. Just jog your memory a little bit about what we covered earlier this week. And then we'll continue with histology, getting into connective tissue, possibly muscular and nervous tissue as well. And if we have time, we'll even get into the integumentary system. If we don't, we'll just pick that up on Friday. I'll provide some details about quiz number 1 for you, and then we'll wrap things out, and I've got a ticket out for you at the end of class today. So first things first, grab your notebook and make a chart that looks like this. You're going to play a review activity game. You've got one column, you've got 3 words, ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. You've got another column with 3 words, muscles, lining of intestines, and spinal cord. Go ahead and make that little table, and then draw lines and match them up and see if you can get it. I don't have a timer for this. I'll just look and see when you're done writing. So remember, the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm are the 3 primary germ layers. We talked about them on Monday. It's the world's most exciting matching game. Seen some people writing. Try to do it without consulting your notes, but if you're stuck, then of course take a look. All right, see, most of you got it down. Let's take a look. You should have something that looks like this. So remember, your ectoderm is the outermost germ layer, and that gives rise to your skin and integumentary system, your epidermis, and your hair and your nails, which we'll cover, but also importantly, your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord. The mesoderm is that middle layer, and that gives rise to your muscles and most of your bones, but not all. It's a little complicated. Most of your larger internal organs, like your kidneys and your liver and things like that. And then the endoderm is the innermost layer, and that primarily gives rise to the endothelial, well, excuse me, the epithelial cells that line your digestive tract and your intestines. So on your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines, and all that. Just a quick refresher, we need seats, don't we? Holy cow, we should have enough chairs in here, don't we?
Yeah, sorry, we got lost, so we were just.
Yeah, the Science Center is potentially the world's. Well, how come we're out of chairs? I thought we had enough in there.
There's one here.
Oh yeah, there's one up here. We can make room there. And then, is there another chair somewhere? Wait, what? Okay, I thought we had. That's interesting that we don't have enough chairs. That kind of sucks. Well, I apologize for that. How many? We're just a big happy family. Let's get you a chair though. Here, you can use this one. Oh my gosh, here we got a piano, but you can sit at the piano if you want. It's a little weird. But here, why don't we put this one up and do the piano? Maybe someone on the end, if you could scoot down a little bit on one of the ends. Yeah. I'm just gonna peek back here. If there's a chair. We got this chair too. Now nobody's gonna want to be the last person in class to get stuck with that one. Okay, let's go back to germ layers. What questions do you have about this? Dan, yep.
Yeah, so with the ectoderm include the peripheral nervous system as well?
The ectoderm is where do the peripheral nervous system nerves arise from? That's a good question. I don't know the answer. Let me get back to you on that one.
Okay.
I know it's a central nervous. Now I'm trying to think, and I'm not 100% sure. So let me double check and get back to you. That's a really good question. I don't want to say anything, so I might mislead you. Cool. Others? Peripheral nervous system. Yeah, I gotta look that up. Okay. All right. Histology, as you remember, is the study of tissues. Tissues, importantly, are a group of closely associated cells that perform related functions and are similar in structure. So they're cells that work together. They're kind of the same, more or less, and they do more or less the same function as they work together. You might remember there's 4 basic tissue types. Epithelial tissue primarily covers your body and organs. Connective tissue provides support and protection. Muscle tissue provides movement, and nervous tissue provides control of your body, right? And we talked about epithelial tissue in the last class. And so today we are going to, oh no, we started talking about epithelial tissue, that's right. And I want to continue with that, and then we'll move into connective tissue. So remember that you've got epithelial tissue is defined by one, whether it's simple or stratified. So if you have a single layer of cells or multiple layers of cells, and then also by its shape, whether it's squamous or cuboidal or columnar, right? And so we have some examples of that here. This is a figure from your book. I'm not going to get into it in detail. Just want to highlight that your book shows you what these different epithelial cell types look like and gives some examples of where they're found in the body. And you'll reference this and you'll see this in detail in lab next week. Let's see. Yeah, I actually don't feel like it's productive to walk through this in detail in class right now. It's in your book. Make sure you reference that. And I'll provide this material with your lab next week. And next week in lab, you'll be looking through the microscope at these different tissue types as well. What I want to just cover briefly is epithelial cells also perform the function of the structure of glands. We have 2 basic types of glands. So they're not just coverings, they do so much more. We have endocrine glands. And so these are glands that are inside your body that secrete hormones directly into the surrounding tissue. So they just kind of leach out these hormones. And we haven't gotten there yet, but hormones, I'll put this up here. This is important. Hormones, I'm just going to define them broadly, are signaling molecules. You've all heard the word hormone before, used in a variety of contexts, but they are molecules that emit from these endocrine glands. They travel through the body, and then they tell another part of your body to do something. So for example, you have, let's see here, what's a good example? Your thyroid gland is situated right up here. That tells cells throughout your body how quickly they should operate, what your metabolism should be, right? So there's signaling molecules, and these epithelial cells form the structure of those glands. We're going to cover that in detail later this semester. I just want to make sure you know what a hormone is since I'm using the term here. The second type of gland is an exocrine gland. So these have ducts, which is basically like a little tube, right? That take their products to a surface, and where the product with the I'll say fluid, because they're always fluid that they create essentially are emitted. So for example, sweat and oil glands in your skin, salivary glands in your mouth, and then there's some livers in some glands in your liver and pancreas. Those are complicated organs, but part of their function is endocrine, part of their function is producing hormones, and they release these hormones through ducts. So they're what's called exocrine glands. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail about this right now. All I want you to know is that epithelial cells, in addition to forming linings and coverings, also form the structure of these kinds of glands. We also have goblet cells. Finally, these are unicellular glands, and there's a nice, actually I have the image right here. I'm just going to skip ahead and show you. This is a goblet cell. So this is an exocrine gland. It's only one cell, and it secretes, in this case, mucin, which is like mucus in your upper respiratory system. And it has these vesicles, these containers that contain mucin, and then it dumps it out. In this case, probably somewhere in your trachea, or in your probably somewhere in the trachea here, based on the structure. You can see other parts of the cell. You don't need to worry about that. The takeaway message is that the bulk of the cell is made up of these vesicles that are producing this mucin and kind of dumping it into the respiratory tract. And so that is a subset of exocrine glands, are goblet cells. Goblet cells, all that means it's a unicellular exocrine gland. And that's all I want to say about that. Just want to make sure you're aware that those epithelial cells do give rise to those other tissues throughout the body as well. Pause there. Questions?
Well, endocrine glands like just diffuse right into the circulatory system.
Not, yes, yeah. They kind of diffuse into the area around them, but they're well vascularized, so that gets picked up by the circulatory system and transplanted through the body, or transported through the body. You got your adrenal glands, a little guy sitting on top of your kidney, like little kidney hats that regulate your like flight or fight response, for example. All right, that's all I want to say about that. Let's move on to connective tissue. So connective tissue is complicated. We're going to spend a little time on it here, and again, we'll cover it in lab. The first takeaway message about connective tissue is that it all derives from a kind of embryonic tissue called mesenchyme. Now, your book gets into a lot more detail about this that I'm not going to cover in this course this semester, but I do want you to know that this key idea that when you're an embryo, there's this kind of tissue called mesenchyme, and that gives rise, that changes and develops over time into all of these different kinds of connective tissue. Connective tissue is the most diverse and abundant tissue in your body, and it includes connective tissue proper, which I'll talk in more detail about, but also things like cartilage, bone, and blood. Now, the connective tissue proper binds different organs together, provides structure. Cartilage and bone, you generally know what that is. Again, these are more durable tissues that provide structure and support. That all kind of makes sense, right? Blood is a bit of an outlier. We don't think of blood necessarily as being a connective tissue. It has a very different function than these other tissue types, but it's derived from the same cells and has some other properties in common. So it is in fact a connective tissue. And these connective tissues form the basis of your skeleton. They can store and carry nutrients. For example, in the case of your bone tissue, they surround blood vessels and nerves. And so they can protect blood vessels and nerves, provide structure and support for them. And they also include cells of the immune system, like your white blood cells, for example, are connective tissue cells. And so they're leading the fight against infection. That's the big overview of connective tissue. I'm now going to walk through and talk about each of these tissue types in a little more detail. At first, I have one slide on mesenchyme. I'm not going to include a slide of this on the lab. I don't need you to identify it. We'll identify the other tissue types. But I just want you again to reiterate here that it's this mesenchyme. This is found only in embryos. I shouldn't say that. Let me back up. Primarily in embryos. You actually do have some mesenchyme later in life still that can be essentially stem cells for other connective tissue cells. But mostly we find it in the embryo, and it gives rise to all of these other wonderful connective cells I'm going to talk about. And the first of those is what's called areolar connective tissue. This is an important connective tissue because, actually, you know what I'm going to do? Give me 10 seconds to think about something. Yeah, I'm just going to give an overview of connective tissue here. I think actually a lot of the details of this we'll better cover in lab next week. So I just want to give you some overview here, and then we'll get into it in more detail. So we've got mesenchyme, we've got, and I do want to talk about areolar. So this is one type of connective tissue. It's kind of the poster child for connective tissue. And what this does is this is the tissue that underlies your epithelial tissue. So you'll see this when we get to your integument, for example. You have this layer of epidermis, you have the dermis, and then you have this connective tissue underneath it. And what it does is it contains lots of small nerves and blood vessels. It provides like a border to other tissues, like your epithelial tissue. And it basically wraps and cushions organs and holds and conveys fluid so that fluids can move between those different organs. Also plays an important role in inflammation as well. So this connective tissue underlies lots of the other structures in your body. Areolar is one type, and I don't have, what do I do with my picture of that? Let me just grab, here we go. Get a picture of that. You can see what that looks like here. And so you can see notably that this areolar, it's connective tissue, but it has lots of these different kinds of cells in it. It's got fibroblasts, which produce these different fibers. It's got these immune cells. It's got fat cells. And also importantly, it contains, areolar tissue contains 3 different fiber types. It contains collagen fibers, elastic fibers, and reticular fibers. So those are 3 different fibers. They're proteins or long stringy proteins that give structure and elasticity and resilience to these tissues. Not all connective tissue has all 3 of those, and we'll see in detail in lab which ones have which fibers. What I want you to take away from this is that areolar tissue does have all 3. One other important vocabulary word about connective tissue is this ground substance. This is essentially the liquid that is surrounding all of this. And that liquid it's often very gelatinous. And so it gives these tissues a firmness without at the same time being flexible, right? So it provides structure without being rigid. And so you've got this ground substance in between all of these cells and fiber types. So takeaway message, there's lots of types of connective tissue. Areolar is one example, and you can see what it looks like here. It's got fibers, it's got ground substance, and it's got a bunch of different cell types in it. And you'll look at this under a microscope slide and be able to tell what's areolar, and you'll be able to tell that from all the other different types of connective tissue. Questions? All right, let's move on then and talk a little bit about muscle tissue. You've all heard of muscle tissue or muscles, undoubtedly. Muscle is composite, which means that it's made up of different cell types, specifically areolar connective tissue I just talked about, and muscle tissue together. So it's those 2 things together. So as you can imagine, you have those muscle cells that provide contraction and movement, but they're surrounded by this areolar connective tissue to keep them in shape, basically. Mostly we call muscle cells muscle fibers. So the term muscle fiber and muscle cell are interchangeable. And importantly, these cells contain 2 kinds of myofilaments, actin and myosin. So you'll need to know that. Notice here that the prefix myo, do I have this on my slide? No, I don't. The prefix myo here simply means something to do with muscles. So if you see muscle, or excuse me, if you see myo in front of a word, that means it's related to muscle. It actually comes from the root for like mouse, I think, because I used to think that when you flex your muscles, it kind of looked like, I don't know. But anyway, myo means muscle. So these are just muscle filaments. And there's two kinds, actin and myosin. Then we have three types of muscle tissue. Anyone who's taken a previous anatomy class probably knows these. We have skeletal muscle, we have cardiac, and we have smooth. Skeletal muscle is what we call striated, which means that it has dark lines perpendicular to its direction. So we have let's say we have a muscle fiber is this long thing like this. Striated simply means that it's got these bands that go down. And we'll see in detail later. We don't get into too much in this class, but if you've taken a phys class and learned about cross bridge cycling and that kind of thing, how muscles contract, you'll know why there's those dark bands. So when I say striated, that's what I mean. Also, they're multinucleate, so they have lots of nuclei. I'm going to put dark dots here for all the nuclei, excuse me, plural, throughout this. And this is skeletal. Right, and then we have cardiac muscle is also striated, but often is branched in kind of funny ways. Let me draw a branched one. Got some striations. It has a funny branching pair. Generally, the skeletal muscle, they're all running parallel. Cardiac muscle, they're striated, but they kind of branch and link up together. And they're mononucleated, so they just have a single nucleus in a cell. So I just kind of drew part of the cell there. And then smooth muscle kind of looks like a bunch of these things put together. And you'll see this in the microscope side. So a good idea for you in your notes is to copy these diagrams that I'm making here. And you've got, it's mononucleated. And so it's, or uninucleated. So smooth muscle looks kind of like that. It's got these kind of shapes that are taper off at the ends, and they're kind of stacked on top of each other. And smooth muscle is what's known as involuntary muscles. So these are the muscles in your body you can't control. So the peristalsis, that provides the movement of food through the digestive system, or urine through your urinary system. Those are muscles you don't think about, and even if you do think about them, you can't do much about them. They're involuntary muscles. Skeletal muscle is your voluntary muscle. For the most part, there's some reflexes you can't control, but it's your big, your biceps and your quadriceps and muscles like that that you can consciously control. And your cardiac muscle is, of course, the muscle of your heart. Question, Sarah?
So I watched that video that you had before that it was a gentleman that was like, that talked really fast.
Yeah. I love this guy. Yeah.
It was, he mentioned all those characteristics of each one, but like with regards to the uninucleated or multinucleated, what makes, like, does one make one better than the other? Like, how does that like correlate with, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, like, if it's something's multinucleated, does that mean it's like more efficient, or what's the reason?
That's a really good question. It has a complicated answer, but let me give you part of the answer. So what it actually does is it's the multinucleate. So what happens is these cells, as they grow up, to say it that way, all the individual muscle cells fuse together, and each of those individual immature muscle cells has its own nucleus. They fuse together, then they make one big cell with a whole bunch of nuclei. Now, what's really cool is that your skeletal muscles, these are the muscles you work with when you go to the gym, right? After the gym, they're sore, and you've actually damaged some of those muscles with these little micro tears. Now, your skeletal muscle needs to repair that, and it needs to repair that with protein. Where are proteins made? In the nucleus, right? And so what can happen is all of these nuclei, let's say you make a little, let's say you really push yourself at the gym, I'm gonna make a lightning bolt. That means that you damage this part right here. Then all these nuclei, not all of them, but many of them will kind of migrate to this area, and they'll crank out a bunch of proteins to fix the damage to that area. And you can, and then you rest up and you heal up. And so what this allows is some flexibility in how quickly you can respond to this kind of micro damage.
So does that mean multinucleated is able to like kind of heal faster if something's damaged?
It does, yes.
Okay.
Having said that, your cardiac and smooth muscles don't experience that same kind of exercise. So while it sounds like a good thing, you can heal faster after that kind of those micro tears. That's great for skeletal muscle, but your cardiac and smooth muscle don't experience those micro tears, so there's not a need for it. So even though it's a clear advantage for this, I don't want you to think of it as like these muscles are somehow better than the others. Those other ones are just never in that situation, so they don't need it as much, right? Because your cardiac muscle is a little bit different because it's basically constantly doing the same thing, right? I mean, obviously your heart rate can increase and things like that, but it's not subjected to this same kind of stretching and pulling that your quadriceps are when you do squats. And then smooth muscle basically is kind of doing the same thing as well all the time. It's not subjected. I mean, I guess you can give your digestive tract muscles a good workout if you have a giant breakfast burrito or whatever, but it's not the same. I just could keep talking about breakfast burritos all semester. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good one. Thanks for asking that. Any other questions on skeletal muscle for right now? Or skeletal tissue, excuse me. No, muscle tissue. Sure.
So that whole cardiac muscle drawing, that represents one cell.
It represents part of a cell, really. I guess I could put like a barrier here. There's like these special connections between cardiac cells as well, so they can transmit electrical impulses between them really quickly. You'll see all of that, but basically, yeah, this would be, you could say, I'm just gonna put harder lines right there. You could say that's like one cell.
Okay.
And then a whole bunch of them will be kind of connected like train cars or something.
Did they say those were gap junctions? Or-
Yeah, there's these special, and they're special intercalated discs, they're called, where they're the way that the adjacent muscle cells are. We'll have fun with that.
So they're almost like nerve cells?
The special, some heart cells actually do transmit action potentials just like a nerve cell does, and that's to regulate your heartbeat. Yeah, exactly right. Wow, this is great questions. This is awesome. I just get to talk about stuff. I should just come to class one day, like not have any presentation, just like talk about stuff. Cool. Any other questions before we talk about nervous tissue? All right, let's just cover this really quickly. Nervous tissue is located in the brain, the spinal cord, and the peripheral nerves. Its function is it transmits electrical signals. So note the word electrical here. Those signals, which are called action potentials, are electrical. So we have electric bodies, basically, not basically, we do. And they transmit that information from receptors to effectors. So that means that they transmit that information either from your sense organs or the periphery of your body to your central nervous system. And they give your central nervous system information like, oh, this pan is really hot, or this burrito is really tasty. They also send information out and tell parts of your body to do stuff, like make your hand move and write these words. So information is going to and from the central nervous system. And very broadly, nervous tissue contains two cell types. One is a neuron, bless you, which is what is responsible for sending these signals. The other is what's called neuroglia. And there's a whole bunch of different kinds of neuroglia, and they're like the supporting cast. It doesn't get any real credit, but they're super important. And they do, they basically keep your nervous system. They allow your neurons to efficiently send those signals back and forth. And that's all I want to talk about right now. We'll get into more detail. Again, this is just an overview. But you've got neurons that send those signals. You've got neuroglia as a supporting cast. It's like like anyone ever do, like you guys do theater maybe or something like that, where you have like the neurons that are like the ones that are on stage and get the credit and everyone claps at the end and gives them flowers. And neuroglia is like in the back, like pulling the heavy ropes to move the props around. And then at the end, they'll come out after everybody else and they get a polite applause, but not the recognition they really deserve. Go ahead, Ethan.
So would the myelin sheath of individual nerve be considered a neuroglia?
Good question. So the myelin sheath, you're getting a little ahead of us, but that's a good question. So this is the insulation around the neurons is actually produced by cells that are neuroglia. You have like your Schwann cells and your oligodendrites are producing that.
An issue with having, like, I can't remember the name of the diseases where you have a low myelin sheath, you don't have proper neuroglia.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And in fact, most brain cancers and things like that are cancers of the neuroglia cells, not the neurons themselves. But because they're so important, if they're not functioning properly, then the neurons can't do their jobs. Like if the stage prop behind like drops the rope and the prop comes crashing down in the middle of the performance, no matter how good your neurons are, the production's just going to go off the rails. That's good. I'm going to keep going with theater analogy. Good. All right, that's the overview of the four major tissue types in your body: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. That's a whirlwind tour. but that's all I want to cover in lecture. What I want to talk about a little bit now is how these cell types respond to trauma and what happens to them as you get old. So I got a couple more slides on that, and then I'm going to have you do a little bit of drawing. Perfect. Yep. Sound good? So capacity for regeneration. If something happens to these cells, can they fix themselves? And some of them can. Epithelial tissue, we talked about, very, very good at healing itself. Your skin is constantly regenerating. Bone tissue, super good at healing itself. It can take a while. And if you break a bone pretty severely, you need to set it so it grows back properly. But bone is like awesome tissue at healing itself. Anyone who's ever had a broken bone, as long as it's not too severe and it's been treated properly, you probably never have to think about that again. It's not like that bone is now weaker for the rest of your life or anything like that. It heals up real good. Other kinds of connective tissue can heal really well. We haven't talked about these dense, irregular connective tissue, but lots of connective tissue can heal really well. Some other tissues can do it, but not as good. Smooth muscle tissue, some other kinds of connective tissue. Some tissues are really bad at healing themselves if they're severely damaged. Skeletal muscle tissue. Now, I know I talked about these micro tears, but now I'm talking about like serious injury, like an actual like muscle tear or an injury like that. Anyone that's had that know how dang long that can take to heal. And sometimes getting a broken bone is a preferable injury to having like a severe muscle injury. It just takes a long time for those muscles to build back up. Cartilage also sucks at healing. Anyone who's had knee problems is probably familiar with that. Cartilage is generally avascularized, so it's really hard for it to regenerate because it doesn't have nutrients coming in. It just doesn't have the capacity to regenerate itself. I know this pretty well because basically all of the cartilage in both of my hip joints basically disappeared over the past couple of years, and that's fun. And finally, some tissue can't really heal itself much at all, very, very little. And specifically your cardiac muscle tissue, which is super important, as well as most of some nerves can regenerate, especially in the peripheral nervous system, but especially in the central nervous system. Once those nerves are damaged or broken, it can be really hard or impossible for them to repair. Go ahead, bro.
With the neurological re-education that's sometimes done with like SCI and traumas, things like that, would that be more of like healing the peripheral nervous system or working more on the central nervous system to the spinal cord?
Oh, great question. I don't know specifically, but my guess would be it's a little bit of both. Basically, you have to not only are you having to regenerate a lot of the peripheral nervous tissue, but you're having to retrain the central nervous system how to interpret those signals, right? And so you're kind of doing a little bit of everything. That's my general answer without knowing that process. It's super great.
Where would dense, irregular connective tissue be?
Let me think for a second. Dense, irregular is going to be, that is actually the connective tissue that underlies, that's part of your integumentary system that underlies your skin, right? And so that's tissue that can, it provides that structure and support for your dermis and epidermis. And it can heal up real good if you get a scratch in your arm or whatever.
And what about dense regular?
Dense regular is going to be found in, that is going to be in ligaments and tendons. So the structures, especially around joints, where we have where your bones moving against each other in a joint, you have all of these connective tissues to kind of provide levers for the muscles to contract and move those bones. So those are really strong tissues, but if they get damaged, they can take a bit. They're pretty good at healing, right? But they're not great.
That's why, like, if you have some form of like, I guess like tendon surgery or something, like, they would cut it off and then like suture it back. So
that would be the tendon would be dense regular connective tissue.
and then that would be able to heal, like it would, like once you take off.
Yep, it take a while for sure. Something that traumatic. I mean, actually cutting something and reattaching it, that's going to take a minute to heal for sure. But it should be pretty good at healing eventually. The thing you really don't want to damage in your joints is the cartilage, because that's really tough to heal. You can the tendons and ligaments and the muscle, that'll all heal over time. But the cartilage is a lot tougher.
So back to like when we were talking about before with like the skeletal muscle, isn't it supposed to heal faster because it is used to being damaged in the sense of like us like tearing it all the time? Like, why is it weak if it has like all those?
Yeah.
kind of-
It's a really good question, and the answer is that it's kind of different kinds of damage. This kind of micro tears, like it's kind of built to deal with that, right? And it has a capacity to heal itself, and not only heal itself, but get stronger and bigger in response to that. That's why you go to the gym and you bulk up. What I'm talking about here is like actual like traumatic injury. When the muscle tissue itself is actually like torn or broken somehow. And so this is kind of a different level of healing. So there's a term in physiology called hormesis. And this is the idea that exposing yourself to small trauma over time builds up your capacity to deal with bigger trauma. So it's like the idea of, I don't know, building up a tolerance to a poison or something like that, kind of a fictional thing, but yeah, you can kind of do that. Like small exposure over time makes you more able to deal with like a bigger trauma in the future. And so with your skeletal muscle, the healthier your muscle is, the more it's exposed to these micro tears, the more it's healing up from that, the bigger and more flexible your muscle is. If you do get an injury, the more likely it is to get repaired. So essentially priming yourself for something that could happen in the future. That's a good question. Hormesis. It happens in a lot of ways. So for example, let's see, in the lizards I studied, there's something called heat hardening, where if you expose an animal to high temperature, not enough to kill it, but enough to make it uncomfortable, and you do that a few times, it will increase its ability to withstand even higher temperatures and survive those sometime in the future. Cool. All right, let's talk about aging a little bit. Just general, I'm just going to have one general slide here. As you get old, your epithelius thin. So this is why sometimes elderly folks might be very prone to cuts and bruises on their skin because that skin tissue actually thins. Your collagen decreases. So collagen is one of those fibers in connective tissue. This is why you get wrinkles. This is why parts of your body get droopy as you get old, because the collagen fibers in that connective tissue, there's just not as much of it. Your bones, muscles, everything basically gets weaker as you get older. Generally, it's harder to put muscle back on and to build up muscle. The older you get, it takes longer. Like if I was going to go to the gym and have the same workout regime as one of you, you would put on muscle a lot faster than I would because I'm super old. And finally, just one takeaway point here is that the better you eat and the more you exercise, the less these processes will happen. So be healthy. That's my public service announcement for today. But and so the nutrition over time affects these processes, and they will happen more rapidly if you're not exercising, not doing things to promote circulation, and if you're not giving your body the nutrients it needs to keep up with all these processes. There's lots of other things that affect aging, obviously, too, but nutrition and exercise are definitely huge. I'm sure that's not news to anybody. All right, questions? Go ahead, Dan.
I was just wondering. Well, like you had wire in your house.
Have you had wine in your house?
Wire.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So, like,
I was like, yeah, well, okay.
what's the like structure of the house be like? That's kind of like holding those like wires. That would be like
Yeah, you could say that. You know, when you put wires up and you have those little things that you put around the wire to like keep it where it should be. Neuroglia can play that role, but they also provide nutrients for the neurons. They basically do all the stuff to keep those neurons happy and functional and efficient.
It's pretty much like you. Like you keep the wires.
You could think of, and in a lot of ways, quite literally, it's like the insulation around a wire as well. And a wire works a lot better if it's insulated. And those cells, as the question Ethan had before, they actually provide that insulation for the axons of those long nerves. We'll talk about it. We'll see those example of that in lab, and then when we get to the nervous system later in the semester, we'll talk about it in excruciating detail. Cool. All right, let's do an activity. Let's draw. All right, so what I'd like you to do is in your notes, make this table, we got a perfect time, and draw a picture of each of these cell types. Quick refresher to go back to epithelial cells we covered on Monday. You've got 2 minutes. Try to do it if you can without looking at your notes. But if you're stuck, then look at your notes. And if you're really stuck, ask your neighbor. Nicely. All right, just wanted to refresh your memory. Let's see, what time is it? Don't want to start in the integumentary system. I don't think we're going to do that today. Let me just see what I got here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we'll start integumentary system on Wednesday. So I just want to go back and review the details for quiz number 1. Details are in your class program. It's going to open after class on Friday. It's in Blackboard, and we'll cover material through today, everything we've covered through today, not including lab. It's just lecture material. And it will be a combination of multiple choice and short answer questions. It's open book and open note, but please work on your own. So don't collaborate with anybody on it. And I'm going to design it to take about 20 minutes, I'm estimating, but you'll have on Blackboard, you'll have 3 hours. So there's no essentially like that's open time to complete it. You'll have all the time that you need. But I don't want to make it just like open all weekend because I want you to be able to sit down and just do it in one sitting, but I don't want you to feel restrained. So it won't take you longer than that. So as you're sitting down to do it, give yourself a good 30 minutes of time. Make sure you've got that. It's worth 30 course points and it's going to be due by the following Monday. So, and I'll have details again on your class program after Friday. And one important note, it's open book and open note. But what I find happens often with these kinds of questions is instead of, if there's an open-ended answer, like a short essay question that's a couple sentences, instead of just looking at your notes for the answer, students will often like try to Google it and you'll come up with all this crazy crap that doesn't have anything to do with what we talked about in class. My high recommendation to you is just to use the material from class, your textbook, your notes, any videos I've assigned or anything like that to answer questions. Don't just go Googling answers somewhere because you'll probably end up confusing yourself and then confusing me. Like we never talked about this in class, why you're talking about it. So all your answers should be relevant right to what we talk about in class, and all the questions will be directly relevant to what we've covered in class. Remember, each class program has learning outcomes. Those learning outcomes are like your study guide, right? Make sure you can do all those things and you'll ace the quiz, or at least have all your notes about those things organized so you can look it up as you're taking the quiz. What questions do you have for me about our first quiz? Let's think again. Oh, the learning outcomes.
Oh, the learning outcomes to study.
Basically, yeah, take all those learning outcomes, cut and paste them in a sheet, and you got yourself a study guide. Boom. All right, so go ahead and answer a quick question and upload your image from today as your ticket out. And remember, you do have a class program for Friday. You've got more reading on tissue types, as well as a couple videos from Crash Course A&P. We'll do a lot of those throughout the semester. I love Hank Green. He's great. I don't know if anyone has ever seen any of his stuff before. His brother, John Green, is pretty famous. He wrote a bunch of cool books, Fault in Our Stars and what's it, Turtles All the Way Down, I think he wrote. He just wrote one called Anthropocene Reviewed. I don't know if anyone's read that. It's pretty brilliant. It's a book of like these short essays where he just reviews random things. Anyway, he's great. We'll see a lot of his videos. Otherwise, let me know what questions you have, and I'll see you Friday.